This show is part of the Head Stuff Podcast Network.
Welcome, gather round the fireside and listen to a tale of Fionn McCool, Cú Chulainn, Deirdre of the Sorrows, Grawn your wail. From giants right down to fairies, of both the drooping and solitary, and ghosts who are sometimes scary. Anything goes by the fireside. Yeah. Fireside, the Puka fireside, the Marrow fireside. Kings and queens fighting heroes, don't you run from the fun, there's no need to hide. Sit by the fireside. Fireside.
The Snow Queen. Once the devil took the form of a troll and fashioned a mirror. When someone looked into this mirror, they saw only the worst of themselves. It accentuated all of their physical and personality flaws. Not only this, but it championed the darkest parts of the soul and diminished any virtues. The kindest, most altruistic and beautiful person could look into this mirror and see only cruelty, selfishness, and ugliness. The mirror was taken all over the world to expose and celebrate the weakness of man. So successful was the experiment that the troll decided to carry the mirror up to heaven and see the reflection of God himself. But the troll had underestimated this journey, and the higher he flew, the heavier the mirror became. It was as if gravity became more immense, and eventually the mirror fell from the troll's hands and was obliterated into 1 billion pieces. These fragmented shards descended back to the earth, where they are carried on the wind and rain and snow. Some splinter people's eyes, and others their hearts. If a shard enters your eyes, it distorts your perception of the world. But if it pierces your heart, you will never feel warmth again. In the city of Odense, in Denmark, there lived 2 children, Greta and Kai. They both lived in adjoining attics on a terraced building. Between the 2 homes was a flower bed, and Greta and Kai spent their days tending to the roses that grew there. One winter, the snow arrived much thicker and colder than usual, and Greta noticed that Kai was acting strangely. He was usually a gentle, good-natured boy, but he was becoming moody, gruff, and short-tempered. He didn't come out to play as much as usual, and no longer had any interest in roses or in Greta herself. The only thing Kai seemed interested in was the snow. He stared out of his window all day long, gazing at the frozen flakes twirling throughout the sky, coating the city. Greta didn't know it, but one night Kai had opened the window to feel the burst of breeze, and 2 shards of the devil's shattered mirror had struck him, one in his eye and one in his heart. The splinters were so tiny, not even Kai realized what had happened. But every day he continued to shun and mock Greta. He told her he didn't want to be her friend anymore, and mocked her affection for him. Kai didn't need love and friendship. All he needed was himself and the snow. Greta cried seeing this change in her one and only cherished friend. Kai took his sled out in the snow, and there he was greeted by a magnificent white sleigh pulled by 2 colossal reindeer. Even in his new misanthropic state, Kai had never seen anything so beautiful. A woman sat in the sleigh, cloaked in white. If she had not been so radiant, she would have blended into the snowy night. "Who are you?" asked Kai. "I am the Snow Queen, and you must come with me." Snow was the only thing Kai had room left for in his heart. As far as he was concerned, the Snow Queen owned him. So Kai tied his sled to the Snow Queen's sleigh and took his place beside her. The Snow Queen kissed him once on the forehead, and Kai no longer felt the cold, which had never bothered him anyway. The Snow Queen kissed him again, and Kai felt nothing. Absolutely nothing. His heart had frozen completely. He forgot about Greta and his entire life. The Snow Queen and Kai disappeared into the winter night. When Kai disappeared, and no body was found, the official story was that he must have fallen into the river and drowned. All accepted this, except for Greta. She refused to accept it. The girl spent the winter searching the city streets for her friend. Growing desperate, Greta went to the river Kai supposedly drowned in and took with her a pair of red shoes. They were her most valuable and cherished possession. Greta offered the shoes to the river in exchange for the return of Kai, but the shoes merely floated back. So Greta hopped in a boat and paddled into desert water. She threw the shoes in again, but this time the current carried Greta away. No matter how hard she paddled, the pull was too strong. The boat was carried down the river until Greta saw a little cottage surrounded by a garden full of wild flowers. Amongst them, the girl made out the most luscious roses she had ever seen. The roses made Greta think of Kai, and she paddled toward the cottage. But inside the home was not the boy, but an elderly woman. "I'm sorry to bother you," said Greta, "but is there a little boy named Kai here?" "I have not had a visitor for many years, child. Before you, that is. Please, come in." "Thank you, but no. Your roses reminded me of my friend who is missing, but if he is not here, I better keep going." But the old woman practiced flower magic, and she had no intention of allowing Greta to leave. With a snap of her fingers, all roses were sucked into the earth, and all memory of Kai vanished from Greta's mind. For months, Greta blissfully played in the flower garden. The sorceress had companionship, and a maid to cook and clean for her. But one day Greta saw a rose in her mistress's hat, and suddenly memory of Kai flooded back to Greta. She began to cry, and her tears fell in the earth. The tears sprouted one rose, and the rose spoke to Greta. "Do not fear, child. Kai is alive. If he were dead, I would have seen him in the earth. But you must leave this place before the sorceress casts her spell again." Without a second thought, Greta wrapped herself in a cloak and escaped the flower garden and the clutches of the sorceress. Once she had made her way back to the city, Greta realized a crow was following her. She thought it was her imagination initially, but the experience in the flower garden had made the girl think differently about everything. Eventually, the crow landed and began to speak. "You're the little girl who's searching for the lost boy, aren't you?" "How did you know that?" "Such acts of kindness are rare in humans, and they tend to reach the world of animals. I believe I know where your friend is." "Where? Is he close?" "It is, but not easily accessed. I believe the boy is at the court of the princess." "What would he be doing there?" The crow explained that the young princess had been in search of a suitor whom she could hold a conversation with. After 2 days of tongue-tied rich kids, a boy in shabby clothes had arrived on the third day and won the heart of the princess. The crow believed this boy was Kai. Gaining access to the court of the princess was no easy task, but Greta was small, cunning, and most of all, determined. She snuck past guards, down little lanes and hallways, until she eventually reached a great hall. There the princess sat beside her new love, but to Greta's disappointment, it was not Kai. Greta burst into tears once more, and the prince and princess asked her to explain what had made her so sad. The princess was so moved by Greta's tale, she offered to allow the girl to remain at court. Greta thanked her profusely, but said she was still determined to find Kai. So instead the princess gave Greta new clothes and a horse and gold-plated carriage to carry her on her journey. Greta rode around the city in her pursuit, but no one she met had any further information about the missing boy. Unfortunately, the gold carriage she rode in began to attract the wrong kind of attention, and Greta was ambushed by thieves. To her surprise, the leader of this gang was a young girl herself, and she wanted to keep Greta alive as a playmate. Now, the little robber girl usually killed captives, but always kept animals alive. She added Greta's horse to her menagerie, and the horse began to speak to a captive reindeer named Bay. When the reindeer heard of the horse's journey, he trotted up to Greta and said, "It sounds to me like your friend has been taken by the Snow Queen." "The Snow Queen?" asked Greta. "What makes you say that?" "Your friend's behavior before he disappeared. No body. Obsession with the snow. In the dark of winter. These are all the marks of the Snow Queen. She has no doubt taken your friend to her palace in Lapland." "Lapland? How am I supposed to make it there?" "I can show you," said the reindeer. "I am a native of Lapland, and reindeer can always find their way home." The little robber girl had heard this exchange and realized Greta was unlike any of her previous captives. She was a thief, but not totally without mercy, hence her soft spot for the innocence of animals. And Greta was a true innocent, pure of heart. The robber girl guided Greta to the north and released both her and the reindeer. Upon Bay the reindeer's back, Greta rode high and deep into the snowy landscape of Lapland. The reindeer was well used to the cold, but not the little girl. She fell from Bay's back and into the deep snow. Fortunately, she was spotted by an indigenous Sami woman who nursed Greta back to health. "What has you out here, child?" "I'm seeking the Snow Queen's palace." "This is an evil, dangerous place, child. No one returns from here." "I have no choice. The Snow Queen has my friend." The Sami woman gave Greta a sealskin cloak to protect her from the elements. The reindeer carried Greta further north until they stopped at the home of a Finnish woman. Unlike anyone else Greta had met, this woman understood the true nature of the power of the Snow Queen. The Finnish woman explained to Greta about the devil troll's mirror and how it made people all the more susceptible to the Snow Queen. "So how can I defeat her?" "Most cannot, child, but you can." "Me? How?" "You have the one thing the Snow Queen does not. The strength of love. The purity and innocence of your care for your friend is the only thing that can thaw a frozen heart. There is no magic that can add to it, and this is something that you must face alone. Any aid, no matter how well-intentioned, would distract and defeat you." And so finally, terrified, freezing, and alone, Greta reached the palace of the Snow Queen. It was bigger than an entire city. It was made entirely of ice, cold, dark, and perfect. It had sharp towers and vast, hollow emptiness. Greta approached the gates, which were guarded by snow bees. Greta thought that if the Snow Queen benefited from a tool of the devil, then the words of God would help defeat her. She recited the Lord's Prayer, which turned her icy breath into angels, angels who melted away the snow bees and opened the palace gates. It was even snowing inside the palace itself, although it was so cold that no one would have called this indoors. There Greta was greeted with a vast empty hall. In the centre was a throne where the Snow Queen sat, and there before her in the centre of the lake of ice was Kai. His skin had turned blue, and he sat distracted with shards of ice on the ground. Greta ran to him. "Kai, I found you!" She threw her arms around him, but Kai seemed not even to notice her. He was so cold that Greta could not hug him for long without freezing herself. The Snow Queen spoke. "I am impressed that you have made it this far, girl. What have you done to him?" "I have merely given the boy a challenge. I call this hall the Mirror of Reason, and if Kai can shape a word I have told him out of the shards of ice before him, I will release him and let you both return home." "What is the word? I can help him." "No, this is for him to do alone. Your help would be cheating, and ice is harsh, but ice is fair." Greta felt helpless, and her heart broke staring at her frozen blue friend. After travelling all this way, she could not help him. Greta threw her arms around Kai once more. She didn't care if she froze to death. Warm tears spilled from her eyes and onto Kai's face. And suddenly, Kai felt something he had not felt in a year. Warmth. Greta's tears began to melt his frozen heart. Kai began to cry himself, dislodging the splinter in his eye. He stared at the girl and said, "Greta? Kai, you remember? You found me." They embraced. "I would have searched for you for all eternity." Eternity? Suddenly Kai returned to these shards on the ground. Like a puzzle he had done 1,000 times before, Kai spelled the word eternity, and the Snow Queen's spell was broken. The Queen herself was not angry or upset. She was a woman of her word. She was fair. The Snow Queen gave the children her sleigh and a gift of ice skates actually made of ice that would never melt. But unlike the skates, as the two children travelled south to return home, the snows began to thaw around them. They carried the springtime with them, and when Kai and Greta finally returned home, they knew the experience had matured them. They were older now in spirit, but as they sat by their beloved rose garden, they were acutely aware that they had both been saved by the innocence and purity of childhood. The end. There is the tale of the Snow Queen on Fireside, and I hope you enjoyed it. And welcome to episode 254 of Fireside, the Irish storytelling podcast. Each episode of Fireside, we take a story from folklore and mythology, retell it, have a chat about the tale itself, about the craft, the culture, and the history of storytelling. My name is Kevin C. Olahan. I'm your host and your Fireside Bard. This is episode 254 of Fireside, and you just had the tale of the Snow Queen, an original tale by Hans Christian Andersen and a new version written by me. If you enjoyed the podcast, please share this on your social media. Follow me on Instagram at Fireside Bard. Email me at thefiresidebard@gmail.com. Subscribe to Headstuff Plus at headstuffpodcast.com if you want to support the podcast further. where for as little as €5 a month, although you can pay more if you want, you can gain access to bonus material, not just for Fireside, but for all the podcasts and That Stuff Podcast Network. And the final way you can support the podcast, and the best way, is to buy my book, my poetry collection, Garden Sea and Neomyth of Home, which is available in paperback to be shipped all around the world. And this is, as I said in last week's episode, this was an episode I wrote about nearly 6 months ago now, and was intended to be released around Christmas, but I only got around to recording it today now, and I'll be releasing it next week, the week after recording. And I was initially going to wait until next Christmas, but then I actually really enjoyed writing this and the previous episode, the previous Christian episode, The Little Mermaid, were definitely two of the most difficult episodes to adapt for the podcast. And so I was very eager to share them. And because even though it's winter themed, it is not necessarily Christmas themed. And there are many like eternal universal themes throughout the Snow Queen here. To mention like the elephant in the room, of course, the Snow Queen is most famously, like so many of these stories, once it gets this treatment, it is most famously known as Frozen now, as the basis for Frozen. However, unlike the Little Mermaid, the Snow Queen is a massive departure, or Frozen is a massive departure from the tale that it is based on. Whereas the Snow Queen is a tale of two young children, one whose heart and eye are pierced with the shards of the devil's mirror, and the Snow Queen herself is more of an obstacle than an all-out villain and antagonist. In Frozen, it is a tale of two sisters, one of whom is about to become a queen, and who has these hidden powers. And it still has very much elements of Christian Andersen. Certainly, there's almost like elements of The Little Mermaid in Frozen, in its queer coding, in the idea of keeping this part of yourself hidden and being told to keep this part of yourself hidden, and very much the themes of self-discovery. And but naturally there are many, many more differences. Apparently in earlier drafts of the Frozen script, they were not sisters, and that when, I believe it's Greta Lee, not Greta Lee, what's her name? Jennifer Lee, sorry, Greta Lee is an actor in Morning Show. When Jennifer Lee came on board, she was the scriptwriter and the co-director. And apparently it was her idea to make Anna and Elsa sisters. So originally the film probably would have been closer to the Snow Queen story. And I do think making Anna and Elsa sisters is what has made Frozen one of the biggest, literally it was the most successful American-made animated film of all time, until being overtaken by Inside Out 2, I believe, because we live in an era of poisonous sequels now. But that said, there are so many elements of the Snow Queen that I think are so strong that did not make it to adaptation, for understandable reasons as well. First and foremost being that this is long. This is actually quite a long story. It's almost like a short novella. There are several sections to this tale, of which I kind of give a whistle-stop tour of. So you have the initial concept, which is of what the mirror is, and the mirror, how incredible is that? This mirror that reflects your own weaknesses and darkness into you, and this being shattered and coming out through the snow. So you have our two protagonists, Greta and Kai, and then Kai being struck by ice and being taken by the Snow Queen, and then Greta's pursuit. And in Longer Pursuit, we have several episodes. We have the witch with the garden and flower magic. How wonderful is flower magic? This idea that if you associate someone with roses and remove remote roses from sight, that all memory of that person will be lost. And this concept, this beautiful image of a rose saying that Kai was alive, because roses know who's dead, because they come from the earth where the dead are buried. Like, that is just beautiful. That is pure poetry. And once Greta escapes there, she meets this crow. Always love me a talking crow and things. And the crow takes her to the court of the princess who gives her the sleigh. And then she goes and she meets a a reindeer and the thieves, the thief. She meets the Sami woman. She meets the Finnish woman. There are all these people that help her out on her way and on her journey. And I could have cut any one of them, but they all rooted it. They all seem to root it more and more in its place. A lot of folklore, and even though this is more an original fairy tale than folklore, a lot of folklore stories sometimes don't feel very rooted in a place, which gives them a universality. But I tend to like, especially in Irish folk tales, when there is unique characteristics that really roots them in a place, in a culture. And far more than The Little Mermaid, The Snow Queen feels like truly, truly Scandinavian and truly Danish. And I do apologize if there are any Scandies listening for my reindeer cartoon Scandi voice, which was basically just my version of the Swedish Chef from the Muppets. I couldn't help but give it to at least one person, and I thought better the reindeer than any of the human beings. But even the fact that we have an indigenous character in this, in the Sami woman, that really gives you the impression of leaving civilization, going from the court of a princess to really into the mountains and the wilderness, and finally to the court of the Snow Queen. And the Snow Queen, for her part, she isn't, despite being the title character, she's a very minor character in it. And like I said, she is more of an obstacle than she is a villain. And once Kai's frozen heart is melted, and that is one way that Frozen as a film is unchanged. It still retains a very core theme, which is that only love can thaw a frozen heart. And that, I suppose, is, if you were going to keep one element from the original story, that is it. Only instead of the friendship between two children, it is the love between two sisters, which is beautiful as well. And Andersen finishes with kind of overtly stating his theme, that even though this is a tale of how these two children kind of began to grow up, it then becomes, he points out that the reason that Greta was able to find her, and that is another reason why I included all these characters, was to show the resilience and the determination of the character of Greta to find Kai, but that it is her innocence and her naivete, it is their childlike qualities that as why they're champion. That seems to be what Andersen is interested in conveying. Naturally, because these would have been stories written for children, although they are so adult in so many ways. And I think so many adults, how you have the queer and the trans reading of The Little Mermaid, you can have very similar. This, to me, reads as depression, which we do know that Hans Christian Andersen suffered greatly from. This idea of these tiny microscopic shards of the devil's mirror getting into you, and you being unable to feel joy and becoming quite insular. And I think depressed people sometimes can appear to be quite selfish because they're just trapped in their own gloom. But it is not so much a sadness as it is the absence of anything. And I think The Snow Queen is a beautiful way of interpreting that. If you want to take that reading, which you don't have to, that could just be my own, but I cannot be the only person to have come to that conclusion. But it's really nice to have shared this, and I hope that you enjoyed it. Please do let me know what you think of it yourself. It seems like a good place to wrap up there. And next week we will return to another great tale from Irish folklore, actually an original tale again from W.B. Yeats, from one of his later works on folklore, called The Curse of the Fire and the Shadows. Really good one, mixing history and folklore. That was a great discovery. Look forward to sharing that with you. Follow me on Instagram at FiresideBard. Email me at thefiresidebard@gmail.com. Subscribe to Headstuff Plus, please do. It really helps keep the podcast alive and keeps it going as we relaunch again. Or buy my book, is my favorite way of all gardency, available to be shipped around the world. I'll see you all. You'll hear me all next time. Remember, wherever you are and wherever you go, you can always join me by the fireside.
This show is part of the Headstuff Podcast Network, a hub for the creative and the curious. Shows are produced in association with Headstuff and the Podcast Studios Dublin. Find out more or become a member at headstuffpodcasts.com.